In this week's video, we're talking about teaching salvation and redemption. I'm Laura Siemens and you're watching Kidsman. So before we get into this video, two really important things. One, this is just a little tiny piece of a very large topic that I teach on called teaching theology to kids. So I would love to come to your church and to your group and share with you how to teach theology to kids. And you can learn more about my teaching ministry and you can contact me through my website, lauraleesiemens.com. All right, the second thing before we go into this series is a lot of the principles that I talk about match the video series, What's Found in the Bible by Phil Vischer. I absolutely love that series, and so I would recommend it to you and for your group to listen to. All right, in this episode, we're talking about teaching the concepts of salvation and redemption. So first, here's the definition for salvation and redemption. Salvation is the act of saving or rescuing from danger or harm. And redemption is to be redeemed or to free from captivity by paying the fine. So when we teach children these key concepts, we teach it by using the words often and following those words with the definition. Although in this video, I'm also going to give you some really fun ideas of how to teach this concept in a visual way. But first, let's look at salvation. So when I teach the concept of salvation, I like to share a personal story of me being rescued. Or a time that I rescued others. So I suggest using a true story from your life or from the lives of one of your other volunteers in your Kidsman Club. Kids love to hear stories from your life and from the other volunteers, and they're more likely to remember it then. So one of the stories I share is the time that I was watching some teenagers swimming, and I noticed that one of the boys was struggling. So I called out to his friends to help him, but they just laughed at me because they said he was just fooling around and he was just pretending. But the more I watched, the more I realized he actually was struggling. So I yelled at them and I made them go and help him. And one of the other boys grabbed him and brought him to the edge, and then I helped the boy out of the water. Once the boy got out of the water, he was really having a hard time breathing, and then his friends realized that he actually was drowning, and so his friend that had grabbed him had saved his life. And so he saved him from drowning. And that is what salvation is. It is the act of saving or rescuing us from danger or harm. And that is what Jesus did for us when he died on the cross and when he rose again. When he died on the cross, it was to save us or to rescue us from the penalty of sin. And here is the key principle that our children need to know. God rescues us from sin, from the power of sin and from the penalty of sin. And that's really emphasized in that video series that I was telling you about, What's in the Bible with Phil Vischer. So when we teach about God rescuing us from the penalty of sin, when we teach this concept, when we're teaching the concept of salvation, but we can also teach the concept of God rescuing us from the power of sin when we're teaching about temptation. Okay, so when do we teach these concepts? Well, when we're learning a memory verse. So after you've presented the memory verse and you've read it together with your class, and then you want to explain some words from the memory verse. So whenever you hear whenever the word salvation or saved is in the verse, then you will start by repeating the definition. So you'll get the definition and then you'll repeat it. And this is really important because we need to use the same definition and we need to use it often. So that's how children learn. And that means as a group of volunteers, you're going to have to need to decide on the definition that you're going to use, and you need to all use the same one. I personally suggest taking some of these key concepts and words and writing them and putting them on paper, printing them off, and then putting them in frames and putting them on your wall, the definitions that you're planning on using. So when you're teaching a song, so before you start teaching the song, you want to find a sentence in the song that you're worshiping God for saving us, especially if you have a song that uses that word, salvation or saved. So you want to remind children what salvation means and remind them salvation is from both the punishment of sin and the power of sin. So here's an example of how I would do that. Okay. So we're going to sing, Thank You, God, for Saving Me. So remember that salvation is the act of rescuing us from danger or harm. Jesus wants to rescue us from the penalty of sin. If you've asked Jesus to save you, and you are a child of his, he has rescued you from the punishment of sin. He's rescued you from the penalty of sin. And that is why we thank him. But don't forget, Jesus also wants to rescue us from the power of sin. And that means when we're tempted to do the wrong thing, we can ask Jesus to save us from the power of sin. So we can choose to do the right thing. Isn't that awesome? Let's sing this song right now. Thank you, God, for saving me. So right there, you can see that in less than 30 seconds, we have taught this key principle. So we need to teach this concept often by repeating it over and over again in short intervals throughout our lesson. All right, so also we can teach this concept when we're teaching a Bible story. So if the character in the story is rescued from danger, we can remind the students that God did something even better for us when he rescued us from the punishment of sin. And he's able to do the same thing by rescuing us from the power of sin. Okay, so the second concept after salvation that we want to teach is redemption. This is one of those words that people tend not to use. And I've heard people say that they don't use it because it's too churchy. So don't get me started on that, because that actually makes me super annoyed. You are in church, so you get to be churchy. Don't be afraid to use this word. So redemption or redeemed, it means to free from captivity by paying the fine. All right, so I'm going to tell you a really fun way to teach this concept. You want to plan a really special day with your children's pastor or your youth pastor, and they're going to go to prison. So they be held somewhere in some kind of a prison until enough funds have been raised for them to be released. And this can be a way to raise money for a mission project that your church is sponsoring. And the kids can bring in their money to help the pastor escape. Now, this, of course, needs to be made known to the adults in the church to make sure that enough money will be raised. Once the pastor is set free, he can talk to the kids about the concept of redemption. He was freed from captivity by the children paying his fine. And that's what God does for us. We could not free ourselves from the penalty of sin, but God redeemed us. He rescued us from the danger of sin by paying the fee. The fee was this: God himself came to earth. Jesus Christ is God, and he paid the fee by dying on the cross and coming back to life. So when you do this, take some funny pictures of your pastor in the jail and pictures of the kids paying the fine, and make a really cool poster out of this with the definition of redemption underneath. And you can point to this poster every time you see the words redeemed or redemption in a song or a verse. You can remember that Jesus has redeemed us when he paid our fine on the cross. So there are some practical ways of teaching salvation and redemption, and please don't be afraid to use these words. Let's teach theology to our kids. If you want to know more about my speaking ministry or how you can contact me, you can go to my website at lauraleesiemens.com. So this is Kidsmin, and I'm Lauralee Siemens.